Hey there, friends. Before we start this amazing story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever met someone who seemed weak or helpless but turned out to be super strong? Maybe they surprised you by doing something incredible. Well, today's story is about just such a person. Her name is Clara Bennett, and trust me, she's not someone you'd want to mess with. Keep watching because this tale will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's begin our story in a big city called Chicago. It's a place full of tall buildings, busy streets, and lots of people rushing around. The sun had already gone down, and the sky was dark. Street lights glowed softly, lighting up the sidewalks where people walked. Some were heading home after work, others were meeting friends, and a few were just taking a quiet evening stroll. Among these people was a woman named Clara Bennett. She looked like anyone else walking down the street. She wore a warm coat to protect herself from the cold wind. In her hand, she held a white cane. This cane helped her move safely since Clara couldn't see. Yes, Clara was blind. But don't let that fool you. There was so much more to her than what people saw at first glance. Clara moved carefully along the sidewalk. Her cane tapped lightly against the ground, helping her find her way. Every step she took showed confidence. She knew this part of the city very well. Even though she couldn't see, she could feel the world around her in ways most people couldn't imagine. To the people passing by, Clara might have seemed ordinary. Just another person trying to get home. But here's the truth, Clara was anything but ordinary. Beneath her calm and quiet appearance lay years of training, skills, and secrets that made her extraordinary. And soon, everyone would learn just how special she really was. Now, let's talk about Clara. Who is she? What makes her different from everyone else? Clara used to have a very exciting job. She was once a private investigator. That means she solved mysteries and found answers to tough questions. People hired her when they needed help figuring things out. For example, if someone lost something valuable or wanted to catch a thief, they would call Clara. She was really good at her job. In fact, she was one of the best. How did Clara solve cases? Well, she had a gift. She noticed tiny details that other people missed. A scratch on a door, a strange smell in the air, or even the sound of footsteps. All of these little clues helped her piece together puzzles. Clara's mind worked like a detective's notebook, always collecting information and connecting dots. But then, something happened that changed Clara's life forever. An accident left her blind. At first, Clara felt lost. How could she do her job without being able to see? Everything seemed impossible. But Clara didn't give up. Instead, she learned new ways to use her other senses. She trained herself to listen closely, feel textures, and remember sounds. Slowly, she became just as sharp if not sharper than before. Even though Clara stopped working as a private investigator, she never forgot her skills. They stayed with her, ready to be used whenever she needed them. Little did she know, those skills would come in handy sooner than she expected. Clara was almost home. The streets were quieter now, and the cold air bit at her cheeks. She pulled her coat tighter around her body to stay warm. Her cane tapped steadily against the ground as she walked. Each tap helped her see the world in a way that most people couldn't understand. To Clara, every sound told a story. The echo of her cane on the pavement let her know how wide the sidewalk was. The distant hum of cars told her which direction the road lay. Even the rustling leaves above her head gave her clues about the weather. But tonight, something felt different. Clara slowed down. Her ears caught a strange noise, a low rumble growing louder with each passing second. It sounded like engines. Big ones. Motorcycles, maybe. Clara paused for a moment, listening carefully. Yes, it was definitely motorcycles. They were coming closer, faster than she expected. Suddenly, the loud roar of engines filled the air. A group of bikers zoomed past Clara, their tires screeching as they circled back. One of them laughed loudly, and another revved his engine just to make more noise. Clara stopped walking. She stood still, gripping her cane tightly. She could feel the vibrations from the bikes shaking the ground beneath her feet. These men weren't just passing by, they were stopping right in front of her. The leader of the group stepped off his motorcycle and walked toward Clara. He was a big man with a deep voice. His boots clunk one ed heavily on the pavement as he approached. Clara could hear him clearly even over the noise of the engines. Well, the man said, his tone mocking. What do we have here? A little lady all alone in the dark. His friends laughed, their voices rough and mean. They parked their bikes and gathered around, forming a loose circle around Clara. She could hear them moving, shuffling their feet, and talking among themselves. Some of them called out insults, making fun of her blindness. Others made rude jokes, pretending to trip over imaginary objects to mock her. One of the bikers kicked her cane away. It skittered one ed across the ground, out of reach. Clara stumbled slightly but quickly regained her balance. Another biker grabbed her bag and dumped its contents onto the pavement. Her wallet, keys, and a small notebook spilled out. The sound of coins scattering echoed in the alley. Clara didn't scream or cry. She stayed calm, standing tall despite the chaos around her. Inside, though, her mind was racing. She listened carefully to every word they said, every movement they made. Every detail mattered. You might be wondering why these big people were being so cruel. Why would anyone treat someone like Clara this way? Well, sometimes people act mean because they think they're stronger or better than others. Maybe they wanted to show off to their friends. Or maybe they enjoyed making others feel weak and scared. Whatever their reason, it wasn't fair. And it certainly wasn't right. The leader of the group seemed especially proud of himself. He strutted around, showing off in front of his buddies. Look at her, he sneered. She can't even fight back. What's the point of carrying that stupid stick if you can't use it? His friends laughed again, egging him on. They thought this was funny. To them, Clara was an easy target. Someone they could push around without consequences. But what they didn't realize was that they were playing a dangerous game. Clara wasn't just any blind woman. She had skills and knowledge they couldn't even begin to understand. Even though the bikers were being cruel, Clara didn't show fear. She stood quietly, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening to music only she could hear. Her expression was calm, almost peaceful. If you looked closely, you might have noticed a tiny smile tugging at the corners one of her lips. It was a smile that said, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The leader noticed too. For a moment, his confidence wavered one ed. Why wasn't she afraid? Most people would have begged for mercy by now. But Clara wasn't begging. She wasn't yelling or fighting back either. She was just waiting. "What's wrong with you?" he demanded, stepping closer. "Don't you know we could hurt you?" Clara tilted her head toward him. "Oh, I know," she replied softly. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. "But I also know something else." The biker frowned. "What are you talking about?" Clara didn't answer right away. Instead, she bent down slowly to pick up her cane. As she did, she used the motion to memorize the layout of the space around her. Every tap of her cane sent vibrations through the ground, telling her where things were: the walls of the alley, the parked motorcycles, the positions of the bikers themselves. By the time she straightened up, she had a clear mental map of the scene. "You picked the wrong night to mess with me," Clara said finally, her voice firm and clear. The bikers burst into laughter again. They thought she was bluffing. How could a blind woman possibly stand up to 5 grown men on motorcycles? They had no idea what they were in for. As the harassment continued, Clara began to notice things about the bikers that they didn't realize they were revealing. For example, one of them kept jingling his keys nervously. That told Clara he probably lived nearby, he wouldn't leave his house without them. Another biker smelled strongly of gasoline, which meant he likely worked on engines or stored fuel somewhere close. And then there was the youngest member of the group, whose footsteps shuffled uncertainly behind the others. He was the weakest link, the one least committed to whatever plan the leader had in mind. Clara filed all of this information away in her mind. She didn't react outwardly, but inside, she was piecing together a strategy. She knew she couldn't overpower the bikers physically. But she didn't need to. All she needed was her wits and the element of surprise. The leader grew impatient. "Come on, lady," he snapped. "Cry already. Show us you're scared." But Clara didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply stood there, her face unreadable. The longer she stayed silent, the more uneasy the bikers became. Their laughter started to fade, replaced by muttered comments and nervous glances at each other. "Maybe she's crazy," one of them whispered. "Or maybe she's got backup coming," another suggested. Clara smiled faintly. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Because the truth was far more interesting than anything they could imagine. By now, the tension in the alley was thick enough to cut with a knife. The bikers were starting to realize that something wasn't quite right. Clara's calmness unnerved them. Her silence spoke louder than words ever could. And yet, they couldn't figure out why. Little did they know, Clara was gathering evidence. She reached into her pocket and pressed a button on a small device hidden there. It was a recording pen, capturing every word they said. Later, she could play it back or send it to the police if necessary. But that wasn't all. Clara had also memorized the license plate numbers of their motorcycles. She'd done it earlier, when they first roared past her. Now, she had everything she needed to expose them. The bikers had no clue. They thought they were in control. But in reality, they were walking straight into a trap, one set by a woman who saw the world in ways they couldn't even comprehend. The bikers were getting restless. They didn't know what to make of Clara's calm demeanor. Most people would have been terrified by now, crying, begging for mercy, or trying to run away. But Clara wasn't like most people. She stood tall, her cane in one hand and her bag in the other. Her face showed no fear, only quiet determination. One of the bikers leaned forward on his motorcycle, revving the engine loudly. "Hey, lady," he shouted, "why aren't you scared? You should be shaking in your boots." Clara tilted her head slightly, as if she were listening to something far away. Then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not scared because I've dealt with worse than you." Her words sent a chill through the group. For a moment, no one said anything. The leader frowned, unsure how to respond. He had expected Clara to break down, to show weakness. Instead, she was acting like she had the upper hand. It made him uneasy. "Worse than us?" the leader finally asked, his tone mocking. "Who are you, some kind of superhero?" Clara smiled faintly. "Not a superhero," she replied. "Just someone who knows how to handle bullies." Her answer confused the bikers even more. What did she mean by that? Was she bluffing, or was there something they didn't know about her? The youngest member of the group shifted nervously, glancing at his friends. He seemed unsure whether to stay or leave. While the bikers argued among themselves, Clara continued to observe. She listened carefully to every sound, every movement. To her, the world was full of clues, even in the darkest corners of the alley. For example, the leader's boots made a distinct clunking noise whenever he moved. Clara realized he was wearing heavy steel-toed boots, which meant he relied on strength rather than speed. One of the bikers kept sniffing, as if he had a cold. This told Clara he might not be paying full attention to what was happening around him. Another biker smelled strongly of alcohol. His movements were sluggish, and his speech slurred slightly. He was drunk, which made him unpredictable and dangerous. Clara filed all of this information away in her mind. She didn't react outwardly, but inside, she was piecing together a plan. Every detail mattered. Every clue could help her turn the situation in her favor. Clara knew better than to rush into action. Patience was one of her greatest strengths. When she worked as a private investigator, she often spent hours or even days waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Rushing would only lead to mistakes. So she stayed calm, letting the bikers grow more frustrated with each passing second. The leader stepped closer to Clara, his voice rising. "You think you're so smart, huh? Well, let's see how smart you are when we take your stuff and leave you here alone." He reached out to grab her bag again, but Clara sidestepped quickly, using her cane to guide her movements. The leader stumbled forward, surprised by her agility. His friends laughed nervously, unsure whether to cheer him on or back off. "You're fast for a blind woman," the leader muttered, regaining his balance. Clara smiled again. "Blind doesn't mean helpless," she said simply. Her words struck a nerve. The leader clenched his fists, his patience wearing thin. He turned to his friends. "Enough of this. Let's teach her a lesson she won't forget." The bikers nodded, cracking their knuckles and grinning cruelly. They thought they were in control. They thought they could intimidate Clara into submission. But they were wrong. As the bikers closed in, Clara took a deep breath. She tightened her grip on her cane and focused on the mental map she'd created earlier. She knew exactly where everyone was standing, their positions, their weaknesses, their blind spots. Now it was time to act. Without warning, Clara swung her cane with surprising force. The tip connected squarely with the leader's knee, causing him to yelp in pain and collapse to the ground. The other bikers froze, stunned. No one had expected her to fight back, not like this. "What the?" one of them stammered, staring at the fallen leader. Clara didn't hesitate. She moved swiftly, using her cane to sweep the legs of another biker. He toppled over, landing hard on the pavement. The remaining 3 men scrambled to surround her, but Clara was already 2 steps ahead. She tapped her cane against the ground, creating a sharp, echoing sound. The noise disoriented the bikers, making it harder for them to focus. Meanwhile, Clara used her free hand to pull something small from her pocket, a whistle. With a quick blow, she produced a high-pitched shriek that pierced the air. The bikers covered their ears, wincing in pain. "What is she doing?" one of them shouted, his voice panicked. Clara smiled grimly. "Giving myself an advantage," she replied. As the chaos unfolded, Clara's actions began to reveal glimpses of her past. Her precise movements, her ability to anticipate the bikers' reactions, all of it pointed to years of training and experience. But the bikers were too caught up in the moment to notice. One of them lunged at her, swinging his fist wildly. Clara ducked easily, dodging the blow with practiced ease. She countered with a sharp jab of her cane, hitting him in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping for air. "How does she know where we are?" another biker demanded, his voice trembling. "She can't even see." Clara paused for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Seeing isn't the only way to understand the world," she said softly. "Sometimes, listening is enough." Her words left the bikers baffled. They didn't realize that Clara's blindness had forced her to rely on her other senses. Over the years, she had honed those senses to an extraordinary degree. She could hear the faintest rustle of fabric, feel the subtle shift in air pressure, and detect the smallest changes in someone's breathing. These skills had saved her life more than once. Amid the confusion, the youngest biker, the one who had been shuffling nervously earlier, finally cracked. He backed away from the group, his hands raised in surrender. "I'm done," he cried. "This is crazy. I didn't sign up for this." The leader glared at him, his face red with anger. "Get back here, coward," he barked. "We're not leaving until we finish what we started." But the young man shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No way. She's gonna kill us." His panic spread to the others. Two of the remaining bikers exchanged worried glances, their confidence wavering. Only the leader refused to give up. He charged at Clara, determined to prove his dominance. Clara sidestepped effortlessly, using her cane to trip him. He crashed to the ground, groaning in pain. By now, all 5 bikers were either injured or too scared to continue. They huddled together, looking at Clara with a mix of fear and disbelief. For a brief moment, everything went silent. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves. Clara stood still, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. She could hear the bikers whispering frantically, debating whether to flee or try one last attack. Clara didn't need to chase them. She had already won. Not just physically, but mentally. The bikers had underestimated her, and that had been their biggest mistake. She bent down slowly to retrieve her belongings, making sure nothing was left behind. As she straightened up, she addressed the group one final time. "If I were you," she said calmly, "I'd leave now. Because next time, I won't be so forgiving." Her words sent a clear message: this wasn't over. If they came back, they would regret it. The bikers were in disarray. Some lay groaning on the ground, clutching their knees or stomachs where Clara's cane had struck them. Others stood frozen, unsure what to do next. Their leader, still sprawled on the pavement, tried to push himself up, but his legs wobbled beneath him. He looked around at his friends, hoping for support, but all he saw were scared faces. Clara stood tall, her cane resting lightly in one hand. Her breathing was steady now, and her expression remained calm. She didn't gloat or taunt the men. Instead, she simply waited, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The silence between them felt heavy, like a storm about to break. Finally, the leader spoke, his voice shaking with anger and humiliation. Who are you?" he demanded. His tone was different now, less mocking, more desperate. For the first time, he sounded genuinely afraid. Clara tilted her head slightly, as if considering how much to reveal. Then she answered, her voice soft but firm. "I'm someone who knows how to handle people like you." Her words sent a shiver through the group. They exchanged nervous glances, their bravado crumbling. One of them muttered under his breath, "This isn't worth it." Another nodded quickly, agreeing. But the leader wasn't ready to give up just yet. "You think you're so tough," he growled, trying to sound brave. "But you're blind. How can you fight back without seeing us?" Clara smiled faintly, almost pityingly. "You'd be surprised what I can see," she said. "Even without my eyes." At that moment, Clara decided it was time to show them exactly who they were dealing with. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small device, a recording pen. Holding it up so they could hear its faint click, she pressed play. The sound of their earlier insults and threats filled the air, echoing off the walls of the alley. The bikers froze, their faces pale. They hadn't realized Clara had been recording everything. Every cruel word, every laugh, every threat, it was all captured perfectly. "This is proof of what you've done tonight," Clara explained calmly. "And guess what? It's already saved to my phone. If anything happens to me or if you decide to come after me again, I'll send this straight to the police." The leader's jaw dropped. "You recorded us," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded. "Every word." The youngest biker took a step back, his hands trembling. "We're dead," he muttered. If our boss finds out about this. That comment caught Clara's attention. She tilted her head slightly, listening closely. Your boss, she repeated. So you work for someone else? It wasn't a question, it was a statement. The bikers exchanged panicked looks, realizing they had accidentally revealed too much. The leader tried to cover his mistake by waving dismissively. Forget about that, he snapped. It doesn't matter. But Clara wasn't fooled. She leaned forward slightly, her voice sharp and commanding. Oh, it matters more than you think. Tell me, who do you work for? The bikers hesitated, torn between fear of their boss and fear of Clara. Finally, the youngest one blurted out, It's Victor Kane. He runs the gang downtown. Clara's expression didn't change, but inside, her mind raced. Victor Kane. She had heard that name before. During her days as a private investigator, she had worked on several cases involving organized crime. Kane was known for being ruthless, controlling his territory with an iron fist. If these bikers worked for him, then tonight's attack wasn't random, it was personal. Now that Clara knew who was behind the attack, she wanted answers. Why would Victor Kane send his men after her? What had she done to draw his attention? She turned her focus back to the leader, her voice icy. Why did Kane send you here? She asked. What does he want from me? The leader swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He thought you were nosing around, he admitted reluctantly. Kane heard rumors that you've been asking questions about his business. He wanted us to scare you off. Clara frowned. She hadn't been investigating Kane, at least, not recently. But now she understood why she had been targeted. Someone must have tipped Kane off, making him believe she posed a threat. Whoever it was, they had underestimated her and made a grave mistake. Well, you can tell Kane this, Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. If he wants to mess with me, he'll regret it. I don't back down easily. The bikers stared at her, their confidence shattered. They had come to intimidate a blind woman, only to find themselves facing someone far more dangerous than they could have imagined. As the confrontation continued, Clara revealed more about herself, not just her identity, but also her skills. She explained how her blindness had forced her to rely on her other senses, turning what others might see as a weakness into a strength. For years, I worked as a private investigator, she told them. I solved cases that no one else could crack. Do you know why? Because I noticed things other people missed. Tiny details, the way someone walks, the sound of their voice, the smell of their cologne. All of it tells a story. The bikers listened in stunned silence. They had never met anyone like Clara before. To them, she was a mystery, a woman who seemed fragile on the surface but was actually stronger than anyone they had ever encountered. And tonight, Clara added, you gave me plenty of clues. Like the jingling keys in your pocket, she said, pointing to one of the bikers. Or the smell of gasoline on your clothes, she added, gesturing to another. Even the way you shuffle your feet when you're nervous. All of it helped me figure out how to stop you. The bikers shifted uncomfortably, realizing how thoroughly they had been outsmarted. They weren't just beaten physically, they were defeated mentally. Clara had used their own actions against them, turning their arrogance into their downfall. Before the bikers could recover, Clara delivered one final blow, one that hit harder than any strike from her cane. She stepped closer to the leader, her voice low but clear. Let me make something very clear, she said. You came here thinking you could hurt me because I'm blind. You thought I was weak. But look at yourselves now. Who's weak now? The leader hung his head, unable to meet her gaze. His friends shuffled awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. They knew she was right. They had judged Clara based on appearances, and it had cost them dearly. Clara softened her tone slightly, though her words remained firm. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And respect starts with treating others the way you want to be treated. Remember that. Her message resonated deeply, even with men who weren't used to hearing such wisdom. For the first time, they saw Clara not as a victim, but as a person worthy of admiration. By the end of the confrontation, Clara had achieved something remarkable: victory without unnecessary violence. Yes, she had fought back when necessary, using her cane to defend herself. But she hadn't sought revenge or inflicted lasting harm. Instead, she had used her intelligence, patience, and courage to turn the situation in her favor. As the bikers scrambled to their motorcycles, eager to escape, Clara watched them go. She didn't chase after them or threaten further punishment. She simply stood there, her cane tapping lightly against the ground. The night was quiet once again, the chaos replaced by peace. Clara bent down to gather her belongings, making sure nothing was left behind. As she straightened up, she allowed herself a small smile. Tonight had been a test, a reminder that she was still capable of handling whatever life threw her way. And she had passed with flying colors. The bikers didn't waste any time leaving the alley. They hopped onto their motorcycles as fast as they could, their engines roaring to life. The leader, still limping from Clara's earlier strike, struggled to climb onto his bike. His friends didn't wait for him, they sped off into the night, abandoning him without a second thought. Clara listened to the sound of their engines fading into the distance. She could hear the panic in their movements, the way they revved their bikes too hard and took corners too sharply. It was clear they were running not just from her, but from the consequences of their actions. When the last motorcycle disappeared around the corner, Clara let out a slow breath. The tension in the air began to lift, replaced by the soft hum of the city returning to normal. Cars passed by on the nearby road, their headlights casting faint shadows on the walls of the alley. Pedestrians resumed their walks, unaware of the drama that had unfolded moments ago. Clara bent down one last time to pick up her wallet and keys, which had been scattered during the attack. Her hands moved methodically, feeling each item before slipping it back into her bag. Everything was accounted for, nothing missing. She straightened up, gripping her cane firmly, and took a moment to steady herself. Despite the adrenaline rush, Clara felt calm. She had faced danger before, both as a private investigator and in her personal life. Each challenge had taught her something new about herself. Tonight was no different. She had proven once again that being blind didn't mean being powerless. As Clara made her way home, she replayed the events of the night in her mind. The biker's confession about working for Victor Kane weighed heavily on her thoughts. Why would Kane send his men after her? What did he think she knew or planned to do? Clara wasn't naive. She understood how dangerous Kane was. He ruled his territory with fear and violence, crushing anyone who dared cross him. But Clara wasn't afraid. In fact, she saw this as an opportunity, an opening to expose Kane's operation and bring justice to those he harmed. When she reached her apartment, Clara locked the door behind her and set her bag on the table. She pulled out her phone and opened the recording app. The audio file from the alley played back clearly, the bikers' insults, their threats, and their admission of working for Kane. Clara saved the file to a secure cloud account, ensuring it couldn't be lost or tampered with. Then she sent a text message to an old contact, a journalist named Sarah Miller. Sarah specialized in uncovering corruption and organized crime. Over the years, Clara had worked with her on several cases, sharing information that led to major arrests. Though they hadn't spoken in months, Clara knew Sarah would understand the importance of what she had discovered. Sarah, Clara typed, I need your help. I have evidence linking Victor Kane to criminal activity. Can we meet tomorrow? Within minutes, Sarah replied, of course. Same cafe as always. Clara smiled. Perfect. The next morning, Clara met Sarah at a small cafe near the park. The two women sat at a corner table, away from prying eyes. Clara handed Sarah a USB drive containing the recording from the previous night. "This is proof that Cain ordered his men to attack me," Clara explained. "They admitted it themselves. If you dig deeper, I'm sure you'll find more connections between Cain and other crimes." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "This is huge, Clara. With this kind of evidence, we can take him down. But it won't be easy. Cain has powerful allies, and he'll fight back hard." "I know," Clara said calmly. "But sometimes, you have to stand up for what's right even if it's risky." Sarah studied Clara for a moment, admiration in her eyes. "You never cease to amaze me. Most people would have backed off after an attack like that. But not you." Clara shrugged modestly. "I've spent my whole life fighting for justice. This is just another chapter." Unbeknownst to Clara, the bikers had already reported back to Victor Cain. They arrived at his hideout, a dimly lit warehouse filled with stolen goods and illegal weapons looking worse for wear. Their bruises and cuts told the story of their failure. Cain stood in the center of the room, his arms crossed over his chest. His piercing gaze swept over the group, taking in their battered appearance. When he spoke, his voice was low and menacing. "What happened?" he demanded. The leader stepped forward hesitantly, avoiding eye contact. We tried to scare her, boss. Like you said. But she fought back. She's stronger than we thought." Cain's jaw tightened. "Stronger? How?" "She's blind," the leader stammered, "but she moves like she can see. She hears everything. And she recorded us. She said she'll send the recording to the cops if we mess with her again." Cain's face darkened with rage. "You idiots," he barked. "Do you realize what this means? If the police get involved, it'll ruin everything." The bikers flinched, knowing they had failed their boss. Cain paced back and forth, his mind racing. He needed to fix this, and quickly. Later that day, Cain received a package at his warehouse. Inside was a single envelope containing a printed transcript of the biker's conversation with Clara. At the bottom of the page, written in bold letters, was a message. "Stay away from me or face the consequences." Cain crumpled the paper in his fist, his anger boiling over. He called one of his top enforcers into the room. "Find out everything you can about this woman," he ordered. "Who is she? What does she want? And why is she sticking her nose where it doesn't belong?" The enforcer nodded and left to carry out Cain's orders. But deep down, Cain felt uneasy. Something about Clara unsettled him. She wasn't like the others he had intimidated or silenced. She was different, and that made her dangerous. Over the next few weeks, Sarah worked tirelessly to investigate Cain's operation. Using Clara's evidence as a starting point, she uncovered a web of corruption involving bribery, extortion, and violence. She published a series of articles exposing Cain's crimes, sparking outrage in the community. The public demanded action. Local authorities launched a full-scale investigation, raiding Cain's warehouses and arresting dozens of his associates. Without his network of enforcers and informants, Cain found himself isolated and vulnerable. Clara followed the news closely, listening to updates on the radio and reading articles online. She felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that her actions had sparked change. But she also knew the fight wasn't over yet. Cain was still out there, hiding in the shadows. One evening, Clara received a call from Sarah. "It's done," Sarah said triumphantly. "Cain's been arrested. They found enough evidence to charge him with multiple counts of racketeering and assault. He won't be walking free anytime soon." Clara smiled, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Sarah. You did amazing work." "No," Sarah replied. "This was all you, Clara. You took a stand when no one else would. That takes real courage." Clara thought about that for a moment. Courage wasn't something she had ever sought, it was simply part of who she was. She had learned long ago that fear could either paralyze you or push you to grow stronger. For Clara, it had always been the latter. As she hung up the phone, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. Life had thrown challenges her way, but she had faced them head on. Being blind had forced her to adapt, to rely on her other senses and skills. And in doing so, she had become someone capable of making a difference not just for herself, but for others. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara sat by her window, her cane resting against the arm of her chair. She listened to the sounds of the evening, the distant hum of traffic, the rustling leaves in the park across the street, and the occasional laugh of children playing outside. It was a peaceful moment, one she had earned after weeks of tension and danger. Clara thought about everything that had happened. From the night the bikers attacked her to the arrest of Victor Kane, it had been a whirlwind of events. But through it all, she had stayed true to herself, calm, determined, and fearless. She hadn't let fear or anger guide her actions. Instead, she had relied on her instincts, her skills, and her unwavering sense of justice. As she sat there, Clara realized something important: this wasn't just her victory, it belonged to everyone who believed in standing up for what's right. People like Sarah, the journalist who had risked her career to expose the truth. Or the neighbors who had cheered when Kane was arrested, knowing their streets would finally be safer. Even the youngest biker, who had broken down and walked away from his gang, showed that change was possible if you chose the right path. Clara smiled softly. The world could be a scary place sometimes, but it was also full of hope. And hope, she knew, started with small acts of courage. Clara often thought about the lessons life had taught her. Being blind had changed her in ways she never expected. At first, she had felt lost and frustrated. How could she continue doing the work she loved without being able to see? But over time, she had discovered new strengths, ways of seeing the world that others couldn't. For example, she had learned to listen more closely. Sounds told stories. A creaking floorboard might mean someone was sneaking around. The rhythm of footsteps could reveal whether a person was nervous or confident. Even the tone of someone's voice could hint at their intentions. These details helped Clara navigate the world and solve problems in ways most people wouldn't think of. She had also learned to trust her instincts. Sometimes, you didn't need proof to know something was wrong. Your gut feeling could be just as powerful as evidence. That's why, when the bikers surrounded her in the alley, Clara hadn't hesitated. She had known exactly what to do because she trusted herself. But perhaps the biggest lesson Clara had learned was this: strength isn't always about physical power. True strength comes from within, from your heart, your mind, and your spirit. It's about standing tall even when others try to knock you down. It's about believing in yourself, even when the odds seem impossible. Clara's actions had created a ripple effect, touching lives far beyond her own. Take the youngest biker, for instance. After walking away from his gang that night, he had gone home and started thinking about his choices. He realized he didn't want to live a life of crime anymore. So he applied for a job at a local garage, using his knowledge of motorcycles to fix engines instead of causing trouble. His boss noticed his hard work and gave him a promotion. Now, he was saving money to go back to school and build a better future. Then there were the residents of Clara's neighborhood. For years, they had lived in fear of Victor Kane and his gang. They avoided certain streets, kept their doors locked at all times, and whispered about the crimes they witnessed but were too scared to report. But after Kane's arrest, things began to change. Neighbors started talking to each other again, organizing block parties and community cleanups. Kids played outside without worrying about danger. The neighborhood felt alive again. Even Clara herself had been affected. The experience had reminded her of why she had become a private investigator in the first place: to help people and make the world a little brighter. Though she no longer worked cases professionally, she still found ways to use her skills. Whether it was helping a friend track down a missing wallet or advising Sarah on her investigations, Clara remained committed to making a difference. Clara hoped her story would inspire others to find their own courage. She wanted people to understand that everyone has the power to stand up for what's right even if they feel small or powerless. You didn't need superhuman strength or special abilities to make a difference. All you needed was determination and a willingness to act. She thought about how many times people underestimated her because of her blindness. They assumed she couldn't defend herself or solve problems. But those assumptions were wrong. Clara had proven that appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone looks weak doesn't mean they are. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the most power. That's why Clara encouraged others to look beyond surface-level judgments. Don't assume you know someone based on how they look or sound. Everyone has a story, and everyone has potential. By treating others with kindness and respect, you create a world where people feel valued and inspired to rise to their best selves. Clara believed deeply in the power of hope. No matter how dark things seemed, there was always a way forward. Even in the darkest alley, there was light waiting to shine through. All it took was one brave step, one decision to do the right thing. She remembered a quote she had once read: "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." Those words resonated with her. Fear was natural. Everyone felt it at some point. But letting fear control you only made it stronger. Facing your fears, on the other hand, made you stronger. Clara hoped her story would remind people that they were capable of more than they realized. Whether it was standing up to a bully, speaking out against injustice, or simply lending a hand to someone in need, every action mattered. Together, those actions added up to create real change. As Clara gazed out the window, she felt a sense of peace. Her fight against Victor Kane was over, but her journey wasn't. There would always be challenges ahead, new obstacles to overcome, new people to help. And Clara was ready. She planned to keep working with Sarah, sharing information and supporting investigations into corruption and crime. She also wanted to mentor young people, teaching them the importance of integrity and resilience. If she could inspire even one person to believe in themselves, then her efforts would be worth it. Clara knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. Life rarely was. But she also knew that every challenge brought an opportunity to grow stronger, wiser, and kinder. And that's what made the journey worthwhile. Before heading to bed, Clara turned off the lamp beside her chair. The room grew dark, but she didn't mind. Darkness didn't scare her anymore. In fact, she had come to appreciate it. It gave her space to think, to reflect, and to dream. As she drifted off to sleep, Clara thought about the future, not just hers, but everyone's. She imagined a world where people treated each other with compassion and respect. A world where courage was celebrated, and justice prevailed. It was a big dream, but Clara believed it was possible. After all, every great change started with a single step. And Clara? She had already taken hers.